Hey guys, tonight we're easing into a long, gentle journey, and we're starting in a place that probably smells much stronger than you're currently smelling. It's Paris, late 1789. The air feels heavy with candle smoke and fresh bread, but also with something much less appetizing, the nervous tension of a city about to break. You're standing in a noisy square that smells suspiciously unlike flowers, more like a combination of wet stone, unwashed linen, and the distinct, coppery scent of brewing historical trouble. Shadows stretch across the rough cobblestone walls like sleepy cats, long and thin, waving gently in the fitful light of a few street lanterns. They dance along the worn facades of four-story buildings, casting the entire city in a flickering, uncertain glow. You can hear the rhythmic, distant clatter of a carriage and the high-pitched, slightly slurred song of someone walking home a little too late and a little too happy. It's a symphony of pre-revolutionary unease, and you're standing right in the middle of the overture. Honestly, you probably wouldn't last an hour here. Most modern folks wouldn't make it past breakfast without panicking about the lack of easily accessible hot water or the frankly astonishing lack of quality dental care. Survival rating. If we're being generous, I'd give it 1 star out of 5. Your nervous system, tuned to the gentle hum of Wi-Fi and the occasional polite beep of a text message, would find the sheer noise of 18th century life an immediate assault. The air is thick, the crowds are elbow to elbow, and there's a constant, low murmur of political gossip and existential worry. A truly overwhelming sensory experience. But you don't have to survive, you just have to relax. You are here merely as an observer, wrapped in the protective calm of your own cozy spot. The smells and sounds of 1789 Paris can only reach you as soft, historical echoes. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, let me know your city and hour. Drop your location and local time in the comments. It's always comforting to know that we're sharing this quiet moment across different time zones. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. We're moving past the main streets, where the actual revolution is busy being loud and dramatic, and turning down a side alley, one that is darker, quieter, and focused on the deeply personal anxieties of the Parisian elite. The year, remember, is 1789. This is a moment of impossible contradictions. On one hand, you have the Enlightenment, the Age of Reason, where logic and science are supposed to be cleaning up the messy corners of human life. On the other hand, you have a massive, almost theatrical obsession with feelings, with sensibility, and with the idea that the human body is governed entirely by its nerves, a highly strung piano that might snap a wire at any moment. This tension between perfect reason and overwhelming feeling is what makes this time so deliciously stressful for the people who lived it. Everything is amplified. Every sneeze is a crisis. Every sleepless night is a descent into madness. And beneath the surface of all the political unrest and philosophical debate, there's a constant, low-grade thrum of fear. It's a fear that isn't about mobs or guillotines just yet, but about the deeply personal, moral, and social panic surrounding certain illnesses. You can feel it in the way people hold their coats a little tighter when passing strangers, or the nervous, quick glances exchanged in the doorway of a busy cafe. They are not just worried about the world changing, they are worried about their own bodies betraying them. The air here seems to hold an unspoken secret, a collective anxiety that is even more contagious than any disease. It's an internal plague of worry, fueled by morality, rumor, and incomplete medical knowledge. This is our quiet focus for tonight, not the grand, loud history of kings and queens, but the tiny, intimate history of anxiety and the unique ways one thoughtful, maybe slightly eccentric doctor tried to prescribe peace. We're looking for the hidden prescription, the gentle counter spell to a city in collective psychological distress. As you stand here, allow the noises of the street to become a uniform, calming blur. The occasional cry of a street vendor, the distant bark of a dog, the gentle creaking of a window shutter in the evening breeze, they are just textures in the dark. Focus instead on the stone beneath your feet, the subtle coolness of the night air, and the faint, sweet scent of burning wax. You are moving through a city on the cusp, but you are moving slowly, quietly, and with a specific, restful purpose. Your task is to simply notice the details, the things that are usually too soft to be recorded in the loud pages of history. We're searching for a little clinic, tucked away, where the primary medicine wasn't harsh metal or painful purgatives, but simple reassurance. As you turn a corner, leaving the political rumbling behind, you enter a much quieter, narrower street. It's the sort of place where the sound of your own footsteps on the worn stone feels suddenly loud. Here, the pervasive fear we mentioned, the subtle anxiety that underlies the social fabric of 1789 Paris, is given a specific, clinical name in quiet conversations and panicked private letters: Peril venereal. It translates simply to the venereal peril, but in the late 18th century, the phrase carried far more weight than just a physical diagnosis. It was a social terror, a moral judgment, and a quiet, unrelenting worry that hung over every ballroom, every social encounter, and especially every quiet, nervous night. This wasn't just about an illness. It was about the reputation of the nervous, highly sensitive individual. Imagine, for a moment, the world of Parisian society as a pristine white tablecloth. Any stain, no matter how small, is a disaster. Le Peril venereal was seen as the most devastating stain of all, capable of ruining a family's standing, shattering a reputation, and most crucially for our narrative, fundamentally corrupting the nervous, moral core of the afflicted person. The physical aspects of the disease were certainly terrifying, don't get me wrong, but the social and psychological damage was considered equally lethal. For a society obsessed with honor and sensibility, the shame and the anxiety often outweighed the physical symptoms, creating a vicious, self-perpetuating cycle of fear. You realize that a large part of what the doctors were treating wasn't just the ailment itself, but the overwhelming dread of having it, or even the dread of being suspected of having it. It's the historical equivalent of constantly checking your phone for bad news, but the bad news is written on your face for everyone to see. And because medical knowledge at the time was, shall we say, a vibrant mix of good intentions and enthusiastic guessing, many vague symptoms, a lingering fatigue, a mysterious rash, persistent joint pain, could be quickly and anxiously attributed to the peril. A modern doctor would prescribe rest and maybe some vitamins. A Parisian gentleman of 1789 often concluded he was morally doomed and physically poisoned. Honestly, a little fatigue from too much powdered wig upkeep could lead to weeks of existential panic. This environment created a unique demand for a specific kind of doctor, not the loud, bloody surgeon, but the quiet, philosophical healer. They needed someone who understood that the patient's imagination, their highly strung nervous system, was the primary battlefield. If you could soothe the panic, calm the social fear, and reassure the patient that they were fundamentally a good, sensitive, and worthy person, the rest, it was sometimes hoped, would follow. We're walking past a high stone wall now, the kind that might enclose a quiet monastery or a wealthy, discreet home. The air is slightly cooler here, and you notice the faint, sweet scent of something vaguely medicinal, maybe dried herbs being warmed in a nearby kitchen. This sensory shift is your cue. We're getting closer to the source of the quiet cure. The historical truth here is that 18th century medicine was grappling with a massive shift. They were trying to be rational and scientific, but they lacked the tools to actually measure what was happening inside the body. So they leaned heavily on philosophy, on moral therapy, and on the idea of sympathy. The notion that the doctor's calm demeanor could literally influence the patient's agitated nerves. If you were a highly sensitive person and you got bad news delivered with a harsh, insensitive tone, your nerves could seize up. If you received the same diagnosis, but delivered with quiet poetry and gentle reassurance, your highly delicate nervous system might just accept the treatment. It's like the difference between being woken up by an air horn and being gently nudged awake with the smell of coffee. The 18th century body was considered fragile enough to register that difference profoundly. And this fragility, this constant state of being overwrought, is precisely what leads us to our next stop. The people we're focusing on believed they were suffering not just from a physical sickness, but from too much feeling. The anxiety that shrouds this particular corner of Paris, the fear we felt just moments ago, has a clinical name, a fashionable and almost poetic explanation rooted in the medical philosophy of the time. You are entering the age of nerves, a period where human existence was viewed as a matter of exquisite, even dangerous, delicacy. Imagine your body not as the robust, resilient machine modern science describes, but as an ancient, highly strung harp. Every fiber, every nerve is a perfectly tuned string. This is the 18th century model of the nervous system, a vast, gossamer network of tiny, sensitive filaments that connect the thinking mind to the reacting body. They vibrate with every thought, every smell, every piece of gossip, and every gust of wind. The doctor's primary fear was that these strings, these precious nerves, would become too tight, too loose, or snap entirely under the immense pressure of living a highly refined life. This medical theory birthed the social phenomenon of sensibility. To possess sensibility was to be morally and emotionally refined. It meant your nervous harp was exceptionally well tuned, capable of registering the slightest change in temperature, the most heartbreaking note in a symphony, or the smallest injustice suffered by a fictional character in a novel. You were, quite simply, capable of feeling more. It was a mark of virtue, a clear sign you were not some dull, unrefined peasant. The catch, of course, was that this moral superiority came at a physical cost. A highly sensitive soul, a person with highly tuned nerves, was inherently vulnerable. Strong emotions, grief, sudden shock, too much joy, or especially intense worry, didn't just make you sad. They physically seized up your nerve fibers. The anxiety of Peril venereal, for instance, was seen as a direct physical attack on the nervous system itself. The moral panic about the illness was, in their view, what caused the physical symptoms to manifest, or, just as often, what prevented the body from recovering. It was a vicious, self-fulfilling prophecy, making high society a very delicate place indeed. It became common, even fashionable, to be constantly on the verge of a nervous collapse. Fainting, a sudden headache, a trembling hand, or a fit of melancholic vapors were not signs of weakness, but proof of your deep, enviable capacity for feeling. If you weren't constantly overwrought, you clearly weren't paying enough attention to the tragic beauty of existence. It was almost a competitive sport. Oh, you only wept politely during the third act. My cousin wept so violently she had to be carried out on a fainting couch before the curtain even rose on Act 1. Honestly, the sheer amount of polite, medically sanctioned drama happening in the drawing rooms of 1789 Paris must have been exhausting. The most insidious part of this worldview was the blurring of the lines between moral anxiety and physical disease. If you felt guilt, fear, or profound shame, the emotional fallout of Peril venereal, those feelings were believed to physically coagulate your internal humors or tighten your nerve strings. The physical suffering, therefore, was a consequence of moral distress. It was a diagnosis of too much feeling, which made the prescription less about chemical treatment and more about emotional reprogramming. And this is the gentle mystery we encounter. Where did the physical ailment end and the nervous imagination begin? Even the most learned doctors of the time couldn't definitively say. They would often describe the real symptoms as almost indistinguishable from the symptoms caused solely by hypochondry. A deep-seated medical anxiety often seen in the wealthy, who had the leisure to examine their bodies and fret over every perceived internal shift. Were their nerves actually made of thinner stuff, or did their privileged lives simply give them the time to invent elaborate internal dramas? It's a debate that lingers quietly in the medical archives. The wealthy patient would insist their suffering was real and unique because their soul was so sensitive. The humble doctor, while respecting the social hierarchy, had to secretly wonder if a good week of manual labor wouldn't clear up most of their vapors. But our particular physician, Dr. Anthelmy, whom we are about to meet, didn't mark this state of being. He decided to take the patient's delicate nerves and their powerful imagination seriously. He understood that if the mind could imagine its own sickness, it could also be gently guided to imagine its own cure. You are walking slower now, the stone path turning from rough cobblestone to a flatter, older paving. The air is still and cool, and the scent of that faint herbal warming is stronger, more distinctly floral. It is the soothing, slightly sweet aroma of dried flowers and old paper. The sounds of the great city are now just a gentle, distant susurrus, like the sound of the ocean heard from inside a closed shell. You are being drawn toward a place of deliberate quiet, where the highly strung harp of the nervous system is encouraged to simply relax its tension. The doctor's clinic awaits, a haven from the sensory overload of the age of nerves. You've stopped now before a narrow 3-story building, its facade covered in weathered gray plaster and topped with a steep, slightly tilted gable roof. This is not the grand, ostentatious house of a highly successful society physician who treats only dukes and marquises. This is the modest, quietly respectable clinic of Dr. Anthelmy. The only sign of his profession is a small, discreet brass plaque affixed next to the heavy wooden door, polished just enough to catch the dim light. The door itself is worn but solid, suggesting a boundary between the loud, anxious world of Paris and the quiet, carefully managed atmosphere inside. You lift the heavy, smooth iron knocker, shaped perhaps like a coiled serpent or a sleeping lion, something suitably classical and non-threatening, and let it fall with a muffled, resonant thud that seems to absorb all the ambient street noise. The door doesn't burst open. It glides inward almost silently, suggesting well-oiled hinges and a respect for the nervous systems of the people entering. You step from the cool, damp night into a small, low-ceilinged receiving room. The air here is immediately different. It's warm, dry, and carries that distinctive mingling scent of dried herbs, very old paper, and a faint, sweet pipe tobacco. It's comforting, grounding, and smells fundamentally unlike sickness. Dr. Anthelmy himself is not waiting for you, but his presence is felt immediately. The room is softly lit, not by harsh candlelight, but by a couple of shaded lamps, a deliberate attempt to avoid the kind of flickering light that might agitate delicate nerves. The furniture is heavy, dark wood, comfortable rather than stylish, and there are shelves lining one wall filled not just with medical texts and dusty anatomical sketches, but also volumes of poetry, philosophy, and botanical drawings. You notice a small, worn, leather-bound copy of a book by Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the great champion of sensibilité, sitting casually on a side table. Our doctor is clearly a man who believes in treating the soul as much as the spleen. His method, which seems so unusual to us now, was born directly from that 18th century obsession with nerves and imagination. Dr. Anthelmy understood that his patients, the sensitive, the elite, the ones terrified by the whispers of le Peril venereal, weren't just suffering from a physical ailment. They were suffering from a story. A story they were telling themselves, fueled by social shame and medical dread, where they were the tragic, ruined hero. And what happens when you have a patient who is desperately afraid of social ruin and believes that the moral failure of their sickness is actively poisoning their delicate body? You don't scream at them with a jar of leeches. You enter their narrative gently and rewrite the ending. The unusual truth is that doctors like Anthelmy often spent more time writing than prescribing. They knew that a harsh, scientific diagnosis, delivered without care, could literally send a patient's nerves spiraling, potentially making their condition worse, or at least making their perception of their condition infinitely more miserable. The most important medicine he possessed wasn't the mercury or the purgatives, which he still used, because, well, it was 1789, but his bedside manner and his quill. The greatest mystery about this era of medicine is perhaps the simple question of intent. Was Dr. Anthelmy a cynic, capitalizing on the hypochondria of the wealthy? Or was he a genuinely progressive healer who understood, long before modern psychology, the profound power of the placebo effect and the crucial role of the mind-body connection? Everything about his small, quiet clinic suggests the latter. This room, with its soft light and comforting scents, is designed to be the antidote to panic. You are gently ushered further into the clinic, toward the doctor's study, a room where the writing, the creation of the gentle, powerful prescription letters, takes place. You pass by a small, enclosed garden visible through a glass-paned door, its outline vague and shadowy in the moonlight. You catch the faint, lovely scent of cold earth and wet leaves, a reminder that even here, in the heart of the anxious city, a small, controlled pocket of natural calm exists. It's an excellent, gentle joke of history that in the era of reason and scientific progress, the most calming cure a Parisian doctor could offer for a terrifying physical ailment was simply a bit of kind poetry and a great deal of calm. The patient comes in, completely convinced their delicate nerves are shot to pieces and their moral standing is dust. Dr. Anthelmy looks them over, listens patiently to their highly dramatic narration of symptoms, and prescribes homework. Specifically, a beautifully written, personalized letter designed to be read slowly and absorbed like a cooling herbal infusion. You are now standing in Dr. Anthelmy's private study, a room dominated by a heavy, sloping desk made of dark cherry wood. It's here that the unique medicine of reassurance is manufactured. The light is provided by a single shaded oil lamp, creating a quiet pool of golden warmth that seems to push the stressful uncertainties of the outside world back into the shadows. Dr. Anthelmy's genius and the historical core of his practice rested on a profound, unwavering belief in the power of the imagination. For him, this wasn't just a quaint philosophical concept. It was a physical, measurable force, the engine of the nervous system. He believed that the patient's anxiety, their intense fear of the peril venereal and the subsequent moral ruin, was acting like a relentless poison on their delicate nerves, actively preventing recovery. Think of it like this. Your 18th century Parisian patient is already highly sensitive, their nervous system already a finely tuned instrument. When they receive a conventional diagnosis, or even just hear a rumor, their imagination, running wild with fear and social shame, immediately begins to create internal toxins. Their mind convinces their body that they are ruined, tainted, and beyond help. This conviction, Dr. Anthelmy argued, was what locked the physical disease in place. The patient wasn't suffering from the illness alone, they were suffering from their terrifying internal monologue about the illness. Therefore, the first prescription, the foundation of all his treatment, had to be a powerful and calming counter-narrative. He realized he could not simply tell the patient to stop worrying. Their sensitive nerves wouldn't obey such a harsh, rational command. He had to seduce the imagination, offering it a new, gentler, and more compelling story to focus on. He needed to replace the imagery of corruption and ruin with the soft, persistent imagery of healing and inner purity. This is why he chose the letter. A conversation could be stressful, a prescription sheet could be cold. But a long, personalized letter, read in the quiet solitude of the patient's own home, offered a sustained, gentle invasion of their anxious mental landscape. The physical act of reading, slowly tracing the elegant script, became a meditative exercise. The calming words, carefully chosen, were designed to bypass the highly vigilant, terrified rational mind and speak directly to the emotional imagination, the true source of their distress. It's actually quite funny, in a dry, historical way. While other doctors were shouting scientific jargon and prescribing massive amounts of mercury, which often made the patient feel objectively worse, Dr. Anthelmy was essentially prescribing poetry. His medical training taught him chemistry. His success came from practicing amateur psychology and literature. His patients didn't just need to take a potion. They needed to be told in beautiful, reassuring detail that they were going to be fine. They needed to be reminded of their inherent worth and the strength of their own spirit, all wrapped in long, meandering sentences that were hard to skim and easy to absorb slowly. The unusual aspect here is the sheer length of these letters. They were not brief notes. Dr. Anthelmy would write pages, filling the space with soothing philosophical observations, gentle descriptions of nature, and indirect references to the patient's excellent moral character. The length was a deliberate technique. The sheer endurance required to read them was meant to mirror the slow, steady process of healing, and the sustained exposure to the calming language acted like a prolonged, psychological balm. It's the opposite of a modern medical document, which is designed to be brief, bulleted, and slightly terrifying. The historical mystery this raises is how much Dr. Anthelmy himself truly believed in the physical efficacy of his words, versus how much he simply understood the profound psychological terror of his wealthy, nervous clientele. Did he think the words physically altered the bodily humors? Or did he just know that if he could get the Marquis to stop worrying about his health long enough to read a 7-page treatise on the restorative power of moonlit walks, the Marquis might actually get better? The records are inconclusive, but the gentle intention is clear. You watch as a clean piece of creamy, high-quality parchment lies ready on the doctor's desk, along with a fine quill pen. The inkwell holds a deep, rich black ink, but the small vial next to it contains something special, a subtle, pale infusion. Everything in this room, from the dim, non-flickering light to the scent of the wood and the smoothness of the paper, is a tool in the gentle fight against panic. Dr. Anthelmy is ready to begin crafting the first element of his quiet cure, a powerful, persuasive piece of writing designed to calm the nervous harp of an anxious soul. As you settle further into the quiet of the study, Dr. Anthelmy nods toward the chair where his patient, often a wealthy man or woman from the nobility, would sit. This is the habitat of the person suffering from hypochondry, a condition that was often intertwined with the moral panic of le Peril venereal, and which Dr. Anthelmy had to address before any physical healing could begin. In the late 18th century, hypochondry, or hypochondriasis, was far more than just being a little worried about your health. It was a complex, celebrated, and often upper-class ailment. Because sensibility was valued, and because the nerves of the wealthy were considered so exquisitely fragile, having a persistent, vague, and difficult-to-diagnose illness became something of a social marker. If you suffered from the hypochondry, it meant your mind was too active, your soul too sensitive, and your nerves too refined for the harsh realities of the world. It was the ultimate, luxurious sickness. The ailment was believed to originate in the hypochondriac region, the upper abdomen, near the spleen and liver, hence the name. But its symptoms were entirely mental, a profound, vague anxiety, an obsessive focus on minor bodily functions, and the absolute conviction that a serious, often dreadful, illness was secretly taking hold. When coupled with the surrounding whispers of le Peril venereal, a gentleman might feel a slight twitch in his toe and immediately conclude that his delicate moral fiber was unraveling, and that he was doomed to social and physical ruin. This anxiety, in turn, truly did cause physical symptoms: sleeplessness, digestive issues, racing heart, which then proved to the patient that their dreadful diagnosis was correct. It was a perfect, self-sealing loop of misery. The unusual reality here is the degree to which doctors indulged this condition. They couldn't simply tell a wealthy patron that their nerves were fine and they should get a hobby. Doing so was considered bad medicine and even worse manners. Instead, the physician had to become a subtle detective and a gentle conspirator. He had to acknowledge the reality of the patient's suffering without necessarily validating the specific, doom-laden diagnosis. This required a profound, gentle trickery. Dr. Anthelmy didn't dismiss the symptoms. He would listen to the lengthy, often florid descriptions of the patient's internal dramas, the strange tinglings, the sudden sweats, the profound, inexplicable fatigue that prevented them from enjoying their vast fortune, with a sympathetic, unhurried expression. His initial prescription was almost always time, rest, and a change of mental focus. The letters he wrote were the physical embodiment of that change in mental focus. They were designed to gently shift the patient's inner gaze away from their anxious spleen and toward the soothing imagery of nature, philosophy, or the quiet strength of their own character. He wasn't saying, "You don't have le Peril venereal." He was saying, in 1,000 exquisitely penned words, "Your mind is too beautiful to focus on such unpleasantness. Let us consider the quiet certainty of the chamomile flower instead." The greatest mystery surrounding the hypochondry of this era is perhaps its sheer prevalence among the affluent. Was it a genuine, nerve-rooted psychosomatic disorder fueled by the era's excessive emotionalism? Or was it a form of enforced leisure? If one was healthy and robust, one might be accused of having a peasant's constitution, lacking the necessary refinement for deep feeling. To be perpetually unwell was, in a strange way, a sign of intellectual and moral sophistication. Dr. Anthelmy, perched at his desk, was navigating this social tightrope. He had to satisfy the patient's need for a dignified, complex illness while simultaneously offering a cure that was simple, calming, and fundamentally mental. This is where the powerful, simple magic of botany enters his method. If the mind needed an anchor, something physical, real, and undeniably gentle to focus on, what better metaphor and remedy than a humble, non-dramatic plant? You can hear the soft, rhythmic scratching sound of a quill pen across parchment now, a gentle, hypnotic sound. It is a sound that suggests careful thought, quiet intention, and the slow, deliberate work of calming a fearful mind. Before he dips the pen into the ink to write the long, gentle letter, Dr. Anthelmy must first decide which sensory and botanical metaphors will best serve as the physical antidote to the patient's mental chaos. He is preparing to invite the patient out of the dark drama of their own mind and into the quiet clarity of the garden. Having settled on the primary method, the carefully crafted letter designed to overwrite the patient's anxious narrative, Dr. Anthelmy next considers the physical, sensory component of his cure. He knows that the overwrought, highly suggestible patient needs an anchor in the real world, a gentle botanical truth to contrast with the internal chaos of their nerves. And that anchor, quite often, is the humble chamomile flower. We turn now to a small, enclosed cabinet near the window of the study. It's filled with neatly labeled jars and small, braided linen pouches. This is the doctor's quiet pharmacy, devoid of the harsh, noisy chemicals that often defined 18th century medicine. Here, everything speaks of patience and cooling gentleness. The choice of Matricaria recutita, or German chamomile, for this particular brand of anxiety was deeply rooted in established folklore and medical practice. For centuries, chamomile had been associated with quiet certainty, soothing the body from the inside out. Its Latin name, Matricaria, derives from matrix, relating it to soothing women's ailments, but more broadly, it was simply known as a calming agent for any kind of internal inflammation, be it physical or nervous. It was known as a gentle carminative, an agent that relieves flatulence and soothes digestion. But for Dr. Anthelmy, it was also a powerful carminative for the mind. Think about the sensory experience of chamomile. It's not dramatic like poppy opium, nor is it aggressively pungent like strong mint. It has a mild, earthy, slightly sweet fragrance, a scent that suggests a sun-drenched field and quiet, unhurried rest. It is the botanical opposite of a screaming fit of anxiety. It says, in 1,000 quiet ways, relax. This plant became the physical metaphor for the mental state Dr. Anthelmy wished to induce. He would prescribe it, of course, as a simple infusion, a warm, gentle tea to be sipped slowly before bed, perhaps 3 times a day. But for our nervous patient, the benefit was dual. First, there was the slight, genuine physiological calming effect, easing the digestive woes that often accompanied severe anxiety, the hypochondry being linked to the abdominal region, remember. Secondly, and most importantly for our story, there was the suggestion. The prescription wasn't just take chamomile tea. It was, take this calming infusion, known through the centuries for its quiet certainty, and as you sip it, meditate upon the stillness it represents. Allow its gentle warmth to seep into the places where your nerves feel the tightest. He prescribed the ritual and the imagery of chamomile, not just the plant itself. He was prescribing peace of mind, wrapped in the comforting package of a gentle herbal cure. It's an unusual touch to note that many other doctors scoffed at the simplicity of this. Why prescribe a common peasant tea when you could prescribe a complicated, expensive, and terrifying mixture of exotic resins and questionable metals? The gentle joke of history is that Dr. Anthelmy's simple, cheap remedy probably caused less direct harm than most of the fashionable, aggressive cures of his rivals, and likely induced just as powerful a healing effect through suggestion alone. When you're dealing with a patient whose illness is rooted in anxiety, sometimes the most effective medicine is the one that is the least alarming. The historical mystery surrounding this botanical focus is whether the patients themselves truly believed in the herbs, or if they simply believed in the attention. Did the powerful Marquis feel calmed by the chamomile, or did he feel calmed because a learned doctor spent an hour talking to him about the gentle healing power of a flower, thereby acknowledging his highly sensitive suffering with a profound, gentle respect? The answer, most likely, is both. The plant provided a sensory anchor, and the doctor provided the emotional validation necessary to loosen the patient's grip on their own anxiety. Dr. Anthelmy turns back to his desk, the small jar of dried chamomile petals catching the lamplight. He's now ready to begin the true, singular part of his therapy, incorporating this gentle botanical truth into the deeply personal narrative of the prescriptive letter. The chamomile provides the essence. The letter provides the prolonged, sensory delivery system. He dips his quill, not yet in the black ink, but in the pale, clear liquid of a faint herbal infusion kept nearby, the first gentle touch of the plant's influence on the paper itself. Dr. Anthelmy is now ready to deploy his true secret weapon, the unique product of his quiet clinic, the prescriptive letter. You watch him select a fresh sheet of the finest, smoothest parchment, its texture cool and almost silken under the faint lamplight. This is not the rough, common paper used for bills or political pamphlets. This paper itself feels gentle, luxurious, and respectful of the delicate hands that will hold it. This letter is the physical manifestation of the counter-narrative he's creating. It is designed to be a sustained psychological intervention, a quiet, written voice that can enter the patient's home and speak to their anxieties without the high stress of a face-to-face consultation. The core of his innovation wasn't the ink, but the intention. He wasn't writing a medical order, he was writing a personalized, literary sedative. The historical truth here is that medicine, even as it tried to become scientific, was still deeply personal. Dr. Anthelmy realized that for his patients, whose primary ailment was often their own highly dramatic fear, the most effective cure wasn't a strong purgative, but a profound connection. The letter allowed him to be present with the patient long after they had left his study, whispering reassurances into their anxious ear just before they went to sleep. The structure of the letter itself was crucial. It would begin with a respectful, almost poetic acknowledgement of the patient's noble sensibility, gently validating their feeling of distress without validating their worst fears. He might write something like, "It is a sign of your rare spirit that your internal harmonies are so easily disturbed by the dissonance of the world," immediately making the patient feel understood, and more importantly, special for their suffering. Then, the letter would meander, introducing philosophical points about the resilience of the human spirit, weaving in gentle metaphors derived from nature, like the steady root of a great oak, or the quiet, persistent flow of a river, rather than the violent crash of a waterfall. The goal was to exhaust the patient's anxiety by giving their mind so many beautiful, calming images to process that the space left for dread simply evaporated. The unusual detail lies in the avoidance of direct confrontation. The letter rarely, if ever, directly addressed the subject of Peril venereal. To name it too often was to validate its power over the nervous system. Instead, he would refer vaguely to the shadows of uncertainty, or the brief clouds that cross the sun of your spirit. By abstracting the anxiety into a poetic metaphor, he subtly stripped the fear of its immediate, clinical horror and turned it into a passing, manageable element of life. The patient was left to quietly apply the cure calmness to the abstract problem, the cloud. And this creates our gentle mystery. Was this literary evasion a sign of his psychological genius, or a necessity imposed by social propriety? The shame associated with the affliction was so immense that any direct reference might have reignited the patient's emotional panic. Perhaps the only way to treat the anxiety was to pretend, elegantly, that the true source of the anxiety didn't exist, focusing instead only on the patient's capacity for inner peace. Dr. Anthelmy dips his quill into the dark ink, but pauses, then reaches for a small, separate vial. He's about to blend the literary with the sensory, ensuring that the letter itself doesn't just speak to the patient's mind, but to their most basic, profound sense, smell. The preparation of the chamomile letter is not yet complete. It must first be imbued with the quiet certainty of the flower itself. Dr. Anthelmy settles at his desk, and the quiet ritual of composition begins. This is not hurried correspondence. This is the crafting of quiet certainty, a deliberate attempt to infuse the paper itself with a sense of unhurried peace. The first step, before any words are actually written, is the careful preparation of his tools, ensuring that the act of writing becomes as rhythmic and calming as the act of reading should be. He dips the finely pointed quill into his inkwell. But look closely. The ink is not the typical viscous, intensely black mixture. Dr. Anthelmy has subtly diluted or infused his ink with a very faint amount of chamomile water, a tiny, almost imperceptible detail. The ink flows easily, producing elegant, gliding script rather than the scratchy, halting lines of rougher writing. This is a crucial element of the cure. The entire process must be smooth, quiet, and deeply reassuring. The physical ease of the pen's movement is meant to be mirrored by the mental ease the patient will eventually feel. As he begins to write, the focus is less on sharp, definitive statements and more on long, meandering, rhythmic sentences. These sentences flow across the page, winding around gentle philosophical observations and soft, botanical metaphors. The language itself is designed to slow the reader's heartbeat. There are no sudden stops, no jarring exclamations, and absolutely no medical jargon that might trigger a sudden spike of anxiety. The historical grounding here is the profound respect Enlightenment thinkers had for rhetoric and the power of language to shape thought. Dr. Anthelmy was applying this concept therapeutically. If anxiety is a sharp, staccato rhythm, a frantic internal drumbeat, then his letter is a slow, elegant waltz. The sheer length of the sentences forces the patient to read them slowly, taking several breaths to complete a single, calming thought. It's a form of involuntary historical mindfulness. He writes about the virtues of the patient's own home, the quiet solitude, the gentle light from their window, the steady comfort of their own furniture. He anchors the patient in their immediate, safe environment, contrasting it with the noisy, demanding world outside, the source of all those nerve-wracking societal pressures and Peril venereal whispers. He might devote an entire paragraph to the noble resilience of a simple flower, surviving the wind and the rain, drawing an implicit, flattering comparison to the patient's own soul. The unusual touch is the care taken to ensure the script itself is beautiful. Dr. Anthelmy employs a clear, flowing round hand where the letters are open, gently looped, and easy on the eye. The visual calmness of the page is considered part of the medication. Imagine trying to read an urgently typed, frantic memo versus reading an exquisitely penned poem. The nervous system registers the difference immediately. This leads us to a gentle mystery: how much of the patient's eventual calm was due to the content of the words, and how much was simply the mesmerizing, hypnotic rhythm of the doctor's handwriting. Did they absorb the philosophy, or did they simply fall under the spell of the beautiful script, allowing the smooth lines and long sentences to physically relax their tired eye muscles and anxious minds? You can hear the quill scratching softly, a tiny, repetitive sound that is both focused and deeply calming. It sounds like the gentle lapping of water against a quiet shore. Each dip of the quill, each sweep of the pen, is a deliberate step in unwriting the patient's panic. Dr. Anthelmy is using his pen not just to transfer ink to paper, but to transfer his own quiet, professional composure directly onto the parchment, ready for the patient to absorb later. The scent of the chamomile is now faintly present in the air, a subtle, sweet suggestion of rest and restoration. Dr. Anthelmy has finished the main body of the letter, and the parchment is now covered in his flowing, reassuring script, filled with philosophy, nature metaphors, and indirect validation of the patient's delicate nerves. But the cure is not yet complete. This section focuses on the final, sensory steps, the small, tactile details that elevate the letter from mere correspondence to a deeply personal, multi-sensory therapeutic object. He takes a second, smaller vial. This one holds a diluted essence of chamomile and perhaps a hint of lavender, two scents historically associated with calming the mind and preparing the body for sleep. He takes a clean, small piece of cotton, dips it lightly into the liquid, and very gently sweeps it across the edges of the parchment. This subtle, fragrant application is not for decoration. It is a critical, quiet piece of psychological medicine. The historical grounding here is the widespread belief in the profound connection between scent and memory, a concept ancient but highly valued in the 18th century. By scenting the letter with chamomile, Dr. Anthelmy ensures that every time the patient reads the reassuring words, their brain simultaneously registers the calming, familiar aroma of the medicinal flower. The smell acts as an immediate, involuntary trigger for the feeling of peace he is trying to instill. The reading becomes a Pavlovian exercise in calm, smell chamomile, feel soothed, absorb gentle words. The letter is then set aside to dry fully. As it dries, he takes an even smaller piece of paper, presses it gently against a dried, flattened chamomile flower, and then carefully places this tiny, pressed petal inside the fold of the main letter. It is an unusual, delicate gesture. When the patient opens the letter, this tiny, quiet botanical artifact will fall out, a subtle, tangible gift. This detail serves a vital, dual purpose. First, it's a physical anchor. It's proof that the doctor, the busy, learned healer, took the time to personally attend to this very small, very beautiful detail. It speaks volumes about the doctor's gentle attention to the patient's anxiety. Secondly, it is a piece of material evidence of the philosophy contained within the writing. The letter might talk about the quiet resilience of nature. The petal is a tiny, fragrant piece of that resilience, now held in the patient's own hand. It's actually quite a dry joke on the medical establishment of the time. While other doctors were prescribing potions that tasted terrible and caused violent physical reactions, thereby increasing the patient's sense of alarm, Dr. Anthelmy was prescribing something that smelled lovely and felt reassuringly gentle. His medicine was designed to calm the senses, not assault them. The final mystery about this practice is the extent to which the patients were consciously aware of the therapeutic trickery. Did they understand that the scent and the petal were part of a sophisticated psychological intervention designed to leverage the placebo effect? Or did they simply accept it as a lovely, sensitive flourish from a truly empathetic physician? We can assume that, for the treatment to work best, the patient simply had to believe, deeply and sincerely, that the doctor's method was uniquely effective for their uniquely sensitive soul. The gentle fragrance of the paper ensured that the patient's body got the message of calm, even if their skeptical mind momentarily resisted the soothing poetry. The letter is now complete, scented, dried, and folded. The aroma of chamomile is faint but persistent, hanging gently over the desk. It is sealed with a soft, unassuming wax stamp, not the overly grand seal of an arrogant medical authority, but something small and discreet, perhaps bearing the stylized image of a gentle herb. The cure, having been composed in quiet solitude, is now ready for the most sensitive step of its journey, its discreet delivery to the anxious patient. The letter is sealed, subtly scented with calm, and imbued with the gentle philosophical intention of Dr. Anthelmy. But a medicine is only as effective as its delivery system. For a prescription intended to alleviate the extreme anxiety and social shame surrounding le Peril venereal, the delivery itself had to be a masterpiece of discretion and quiet ritual. You watch as Dr. Anthelmy summons a young man, a trusted aide, perhaps a quiet medical student or a loyal apprentice. Who is the designated messenger? This individual is instructed not just on where to take the letter, but on the meticulous manner in which it must be presented. This is the historical grounding. In an age where servants and messengers were the primary conduits of gossip and rumor, trust and silence were priceless commodities. A single careless word or a knowing look from the delivery person could undo weeks of gentle psychological work and send the patient back into a spiral of anxiety. The messenger is instructed to appear unremarkable, almost invisible. He is dressed plainly, his manner is calm, and his demeanor utterly impassive. He carries the letter tucked securely, almost reverently, inside a plain leather satchel, never folded roughly or exposed to the elements. This letter is treated not as a mundane piece of mail, but as a small, powerful sacrament of reassurance. The route is likely indirect and unhurried. The messenger avoids the main, noisy thoroughfares of Paris, opting instead for the quieter, less scrutinized back alleys, a physical mirroring of the doctor's own quiet, indirect method of healing. The entire journey is a slow, rhythmic progression, designed to minimize disruption and avoid drawing the attention of any potential gossips or skeptical rivals. When the messenger arrives at the home of the sensitive patient, perhaps a grand hotel particulier with high, wrought iron gates, he does not announce himself loudly. He presents the sealed letter with minimal eye contact and a simple, murmured phrase, something along the lines of, "A note from the doctor for your private attention." He waits only long enough to confirm receipt and then retreats as quietly as he arrived. The interaction is brief, respectful, and entirely undramatic. The unusual detail here is the calculated delay. The letter is often delivered late in the afternoon or early evening. This timing is deliberate. Dr. Anthelmy knew that the nervous imagination, fueled by fear and solitude, was most potent during the lonely hours before sleep. By delivering the calming script just before the patient would retire, he ensured that the gentle words were the last input their highly strung nervous system received before the vulnerability of the night. It was a pre-sleep psychological ambush of calm. It's actually a little funny to imagine the intense gravity of this entire operation for what is, essentially, a beautifully written, scented self-help pamphlet. The delivery requires the discretion of an international spy and the calm demeanor of a particularly placid cow, all to ensure that one anxious Parisian doesn't panic. This leaves us with the gentle mystery of the reception. How did the patient, sequestered in the quiet anxiety of their room, react to the arrival of this discreet messenger? The sight of a trusted aid from Dr. Anthelmy must have carried an immediate, calming authority. The quiet confidence of the delivery itself was the first subtle dose of medicine. The patient knows, instinctively, that this letter is not merely news, but an experience, a long, gentle dialogue waiting to be unfolded in the privacy of their lamp-lit chamber. They receive the scented parchment, feel the subtle texture of the paper, and carry the fragile promise of peace into their quiet room, ready to absorb the long, winding prescription that awaits them. The patient, our sensitive, anxiety-ridden Parisian, terrified by the twin specters of social shame and physical disease, is finally alone. They have dismissed the discreet messenger and are now in the quiet sanctuary of their own chamber, the heavy door closed against the noises of the city and the whispers of judgment. The hour is late, the fire is low, and the soft, diffused lamplight creates long, sleepy shadows. This is the moment when Dr. Anthelmy's cure truly begins its work. The patient sinks into a comfortable, high-backed armchair, the scented, folded parchment heavy and cool in their hand. They unfold the letter slowly, perhaps with a slight trembling of the fingers, a physical manifestation of their hypochondry. As the paper opens, the faint, sweet aroma of chamomile and lavender gently wafts up. This is the first, immediate dose of medicine, the scent. It's a non-verbal cue, an instant sensory reminder of the doctor's quiet study and the promise of rest. The historical grounding here is the creation of a therapeutic environment within the patient's own home. By writing a long letter, Dr. Anthelmy was able to control the pace of the diagnosis and cure, ensuring it was absorbed in a state of carefully induced calm, rather than during a stressful, rushed consultation. The long, elegant script, the lack of harsh, angular lines, and the overall visual softness of the page are designed to be immediately restful to the eye and the nervous system. The patient begins to read. Because the sentences are long and meandering, a deliberate technique we discussed earlier, the reader is forced to slow their natural pace. Their eye must follow the sweeping curves of the quill, and their mind must hold the gentle, complex thought across a series of careful breaths. The initial high-strung anxiety begins to dissipate, not because the fear is named and defeated, but because the mind is gently, firmly occupied with something else entirely, calming poetry disguised as medical advice. They read about the importance of quietude, the resilience of the soul, and the way in which great spirits, like theirs, of course, are often subject to the greatest emotional storms, only to emerge stronger. They are told that the fleeting shadow of their distress is merely proof of their profound capacity for feeling, a sign of their noble sensibility. Every word is a soft, warm blanket woven from validation and hope. The unusual detail is the presence of the tiny, pressed chamomile petal that may have fallen onto their lap or the page. This small, perfect piece of nature provides a tactile focus. It is simple, quiet, and absolutely real, a counterpoint to the vague, terrifying internal fiction their imagination has been weaving. They might touch it with a fingertip, feeling the dry, delicate texture, grounding themselves in the physical reality of the flower and away from the phantom reality of their fears. It is a gentle joke that this entire therapeutic session is conducted by a piece of scented paper. The doctor, miles away, is administering quiet care through a piece of elegant stationery. It's the original concept of take 2 pages of reassurance and call me in the morning. The great mystery is the degree of relief experienced at this specific moment. Was the instant of unwrapping the letter, the subtle rush of the calming scent, and the first few validating sentences the peak of the cure? Or was the deeper, lasting effect achieved only after the patient had slowly, repeatedly, absorbed the long, flowing rhetoric? We can only imagine the sigh, a deep, settling breath, that likely escaped the patient's lips as they realized this was not a letter of doom, but a quiet, beautiful instruction manual for inner peace. They settle deeper into the chair, the firelight gently warming their face, and allow the written words to flow over them like a gentle, healing stream. The patient, our sensitive, anxiety-ridden Parisian, terrified by the twin specters of social shame and physical disease, is finally alone. They have dismissed the discreet messenger and are now in the quiet sanctuary of their own chamber, the heavy door closed against the noises of the city and the whispers of judgment. The hour is late, the fire is low, and the soft, diffused lamplight creates long, sleepy shadows. This is the moment when Dr. Anthelmy's cure truly begins its work. The patient sinks into a comfortable, high-backed armchair, the scented, folded parchment heavy and cool in their hand. They unfold the letter slowly, perhaps with a slight trembling of the fingers, a physical manifestation of their hypochondry. As the paper opens, the faint, sweet aroma of chamomile and lavender gently wafts up. This is the first, immediate dose of medicine, the scent. It's a non-verbal cue, an instant sensory reminder of the doctor's quiet study and the promise of rest. The historical grounding here is the creation of a therapeutic environment within the patient's own home. By writing a long letter, Dr. Anthelmy was able to control the pace of the diagnosis and cure, ensuring it was absorbed in a state of carefully induced calm, rather than during a stressful, rushed consultation. The long, elegant script, the lack of harsh, angular lines, and the overall visual softness of the page are designed to be immediately restful to the eye and the nervous system. The patient begins to read. Because the sentences are long and meandering, a deliberate technique we discussed earlier, the reader is forced to slow their natural pace. Their eye must follow the sweeping curves of the quill, and their mind must hold the gentle, complex thought across a series of careful breaths. The initial high-strung anxiety begins to dissipate, not because the fear is named and defeated, but because the mind is gently, firmly occupied with something else entirely, calming poetry disguised as medical advice. They rave about the importance of quietude, the resilience of the soul, and the way in which great spirits, like theirs, of course, are often subject to the greatest emotional storms, only to emerge stronger. They are told that the fleeting shadow of their distress is merely proof of their profound capacity for feeling, a sign of their noble sensibility. Every word is a soft, warm blanket woven from validation and hope. The unusual detail is the presence of the tiny, pressed chamomile petal that may have fallen onto their lap or the page. This small, perfect piece of nature provides a tactile focus. It is simple, quiet, and absolutely real, a counterpoint to the vague, terrifying internal fiction their imagination has been weaving. They might touch it with a fingertip, feeling the dry, delicate texture, grounding themselves in the physical reality of the flower and away from the phantom reality of their fears. It is a gentle joke that this entire therapeutic session is conducted by a piece of scented paper. The doctor, miles away, is administering quiet care through a piece of elegant stationery. It's the original concept of take 2 pages of reassurance and call me in the morning. The great mystery is the degree of relief experienced at this specific moment. Was the instant of unwrapping the letter, the subtle rush of the calming scent, and the first few validating sentences the peak of the cure? Or was the deeper, lasting effect achieved only after the patient had slowly, repeatedly, absorbed the long, flowing rhetoric? We can only imagine the sigh, a deep, settling breath, that likely escaped the patient's lips as they realized this was not a letter of doom, but a quiet, beautiful instruction manual for inner peace. They settle deeper into the chair, the firelight gently warming their face, and allow the written words to flow over them like a gentle, healing stream. As the gentle words of the letter continue their hypnotic effect on the patient, we step back to examine Dr. Anthelmy's professional identity. His success rested on a subtle but critical shift in his role. He was not merely a doctor of the body, but a physician as philosopher and poet. In the context of the highly sensitive, anxious world of late 18th century Paris, this moral and literary expertise was arguably his most potent medicine. The historical truth is that the Enlightenment, while promoting science, also deeply valued the cultivation of virtue and moral feeling. Doctors were therefore expected to be moral guides. For patients suffering from Peril venereal, an illness steeped in moral judgment and social shame, a purely chemical cure felt incomplete. They needed absolution, validation, and a gentle path back to self-esteem. Dr. Anthelmy provided this through his letters. He acted as a philosopher by addressing the patient's existential distress. His letters spoke directly to the core anxiety of the era, the fear that one's body was corrupting one's soul. By presenting the illness as a temporary trial, a cloud proving the deep brilliance of the sun, He decoupled the physical ailment from the moral worth of the individual. He taught them to see their anxiety not as a failure, but as proof of their refined, sensitive nature. He essentially used high-minded moral guidance to treat their low-grade terror, which, to an 18th century noble, felt far more curative than a spoonful of bitter powder. He served as a poet by employing the language of the sublime. His writing was infused with descriptions of natural beauty and profound human resilience, using metaphor and imagery to elevate the patient's experience. A simple rash became the ephemeral trace of an inner turmoil, which, when framed poetically, sounds much more dignified than the reality. This poetic framing allowed the patient to view their suffering not as vulgar disease, but as a romantic, sensitive struggle, something far more palatable to the aristocratic ego. Honestly, the man could have written a pamphlet about accounting ledgers and somehow made it sound like a soothing pastoral poem. The unusual detail is that this fusion of roles allowed Dr. Anthelmy to utilize the power of transference, long before that concept was formalized in psychology. The patient, desperate for authority and comfort, transferred their hope and belief onto the doctor. Because Dr. Anthelmy met their anxiety with such high-minded poetry and philosophy, he was seen as a moral superior whose approval was a sign of health. The letter became not just a prescription, but a kind of moral clearance certificate, subtly reassuring the patient of their innate goodness. This leads us to a fascinating, gentle mystery. To what extent did Dr. Anthelmy's success depend not on his medical knowledge, but on his social awareness? Was he truly the enlightened psychological pioneer we see? Or was he simply the only doctor perceptive enough to realize that for this particular group of wealthy, sensitive Parisians, the only cure they would accept was one that flattered their intelligence and affirmed their nobility? The language of high culture was the perfect delivery vehicle for the simple medicine of rest and reassurance. He understood that a nervous soul could be calmed by beautiful words more effectively than by harsh chemicals. The patient, having absorbed the gentle rhythm and philosophical depth of the letter, is left in a state of quiet, validated reflection. The patient has finished reading the long, gentle letter. The words of quiet certainty have settled over their highly strung nervous system, and the subtle scent of chamomile is fading into the night air. The immediate effect is palpable, a profound sense of calm and validation. But as a careful observer of history, a crucial, persistent question remains: did it work? The historical grounding here is the difficulty of measuring success in 18th century medicine, especially when dealing with psychosomatic ailments. Dr. Anthelmy's treatment was targeting the patient's anxiety about their condition as much as the condition itself. For a disease like Peril venereal, which carried immense social shame, a cure meant two things: the disappearance of physical symptoms, and, perhaps more importantly for the patient, the restoration of their inner peace and social standing. If the patient genuinely believed, after reading the letter, that their anxiety was lifting, and that their core being was fundamentally noble and undamaged, then Dr. Anthelmy had achieved a massive, undeniable success on a psychological level. The physical symptoms that were exacerbated by high anxiety, the sleepless nights, the vague aches, the digestive distress, would likely dissipate as the nerves relaxed. In the context of the hypochondry, curing the fear was often functionally the same as curing the disease. The unusual element, however, is the placebo effect at its most elegant. We know now that the belief in a cure can stimulate the body's own healing mechanisms. The elaborate ritual, the quiet clinic, the personal attention, the long, philosophical letter, the subtle scenting, was a masterful performance designed to elicit maximum faith. Dr. Anthelmy was not just prescribing words, he was prescribing belief in his own calming authority. And for a wealthy, sensitive person accustomed to the highest forms of artistry and attention, a beautifully written, poetic cure was the most believable cure imaginable. The historical records often remain frustratingly opaque on the long-term, quantifiable results. Did the physical illness truly retreat due to the power of suggestion? Or was the patient simply soothed to the point that they stopped noticing the minor, residual symptoms, focusing instead on the gentle imagery of the chamomile flower? This is our central, gentle mystery, the enduring debate over where real medicine ends and the power of suggestion begins. For Dr. Anthelmy's patients, the distinction was likely irrelevant. If the anxiety that was poisoning their spirit disappeared and they could sleep soundly, they were cured, even if the only actual medicine they ingested was a mild tea and several pages of sophisticated encouragement. We are left to ponder the quiet miracle of a well-written sentence, a gentle force capable of defeating the terror of the imagination. The fire is now almost embers, casting a deep, restful red glow across the chamber. The patient, clutching the letter, finally allows their eyelids to grow heavy, the first truly peaceful slumber in many anxious weeks finally drawing near. The anxiety has been addressed, wrapped in poetry, and soothed by the scent of a common herb. While the patient drifts toward a calming sleep under the influence of the chamomile letter, we take a brief, necessary detour back out into the noisy, cynical heart of Paris. For every gentle physician like Dr. Anthelmy, there were 10 conventional colleagues ready to debate, and often mock his sentimental methods in the city's bustling cafes. You find yourself in a brightly lit, slightly smoky Parisian cafe, the antithesis of the quiet clinic. The air is thick with the smell of strong coffee, cheap wine, and intellectual superiority. Here, amidst the clatter of saucers and the loud, self-important voices of learned men, Dr. Anthelmy's gentle philosophy is often held up for polite, but stinging ridicule. The historical grounding is the conflict between the emerging rationalism of medicine and the lingering emphasis on moral therapy. Conventional doctors, trained in anatomy and favoring aggressive, measurable interventions like purging, blistering, and mercury treatments, saw Dr. Anthelmy's approach as soft, effeminate, and unprofessional. They would speak of his practice with a sneer, labeling it sentimental medicine, a dismissive term suggesting that he was simply pandering to the fashionable neuroses of the wealthy rather than engaging in real science. They would argue loudly that a disease of the blood and humors required a physical, often violent, response to clear the body of toxins. What good was a poem when the humors were corrupted? They would dismiss his long, elegant letters as mere, flowery flattery, arguing that the patients felt better only because they were being validated in their self-importance, not because the underlying physical ailment had been addressed. The unusual detail is that their very aggression ironically validated Dr. Anthelmy's gentle method. Their loud, judgmental skepticism was precisely the kind of harsh, anxiety-inducing noise that his sensitive patients needed protection from. The conventional doctors, in their arrogant certainty, were actually embodying the very stress and alarm that Dr. Anthelmy was trying to cure. The gentle joke is that their skepticism inadvertently proved his point. A patient's well-being depended entirely on the tenor of their interactions with their physician. The loud, Conventional doctors, puffing on their pipes and gesturing wildly, couldn't grasp the concept that a cure could be intangible. They required blood, heat, and noticeable chemical reactions to prove a treatment was working. The idea that a subtle scent, a beautifully crafted sentence, and a moment of quiet reflection could be the most powerful intervention was simply beneath their scientific dignity. This leads to the final, gentle mystery hanging over the cafe smoke. Were these conventional doctors genuinely committed to a more rigorous physical science, or were they simply jealous? Dr. Anthelmy's method was far less painful, far more comforting, and by all accounts, highly successful among the fashionable elite. His gentle kindness, which they derided as soft, was actually giving him a competitive edge among the clientele most obsessed with their own sensibility. Was their mockery fueled by clinical disagreement, or by the simple, envious realization that Dr. Anthelmy's quiet script was more effective than their loud, painful science? You take a metaphorical step back from the noisy cafe table, letting the harsh, critical voices become a distant hum. The conflict between the gentle cure and the aggressive cure is a timeless debate in medicine. But for now, we return to the quiet peace of the night, following the trail of chamomile and kindness, leaving the loud, stressed voices to their coffee and their arguments. As the 1790s begin to unfold just outside Dr. Anthelmy's quiet clinic, a great, rough wind starts to blow through Paris, threatening to sweep away the entire delicate, philosophical world that made his therapeutic letters possible. You feel a subtle chill in the air, a shift from the quiet anxiety of the elite to the loud, collective rage of the masses. The revolution is gaining momentum, and with it, the golden age of the sensitive soul is drawing to a violent, definitive close. The historical grounding here is the profound shift in cultural values. The revolution was founded on the principles of reason, utility, and the collective citizen, not the individual, highly refined sensibility of the aristocracy. Suddenly, the very things Dr. Anthelmy's patients valued, their delicate nerves, their propensity for high drama, their focus on internal, personal suffering, were seen not as marks of virtue, but as politically dangerous symbols of a decadent, useless elite. It was no longer fashionable, or even safe, to be prone to fainting fits over a sad poem. The demand was for robust, practical citizens capable of enduring hardship and wielding a pike. The medical landscape shifts dramatically, too. The revolution brought an immediate, practical focus on public health, surgery for the masses, and a demand for medical knowledge that was quantifiable, anatomical, and useful on the battlefield or in the newly crowded hospitals. The philosophical doctor who treated the imagination suddenly seemed irrelevant, an expensive relic of the old regime. Why prescribe a 7-page letter to soothe hypochondry when there are real injuries to treat, real poverty to manage, and real, verifiable diseases tearing through the population? The unusual detail is the fate of the humor and the rhetoric that characterized the age. Dr. Anthelmy's gentle, lengthy, abstract language, designed to bypass specific, unpleasant reality with poetic metaphor, was suddenly out of step. The new political rhetoric was sharp, aggressive, and direct. It demanded clarity, action, and immediate results. The subtle language of the salons was replaced by the harsh, unambiguous language of the streets. A highly dramatic description of one's emotional suffering, once a mark of refinement, could now be dangerously misinterpreted as counter-revolutionary weakness or emotional self-indulgence. There is a subtle, gentle joke in the fact that, for the first time, anxiety was actually becoming a useful emotion. Revolutionary fervor required intense, collective fear and zeal, not the quiet, individualized calm that Dr. Anthelmy prescribed. His serene, individualized treatment was simply no longer compatible with the needs of the terrified, mobilized state. This leads us to a tender, quiet mystery. What happened to the most sensitive patients? Did they suddenly lose their hypochondry and their delicate nerves when facing the real, visceral terror of the revolution? Did the external, unambiguous threat of the guillotine finally quiet the internal, ambiguous terror of their own imagination? It's a compelling thought. Sometimes, the best cure for an internal, self-generated panic is a much larger, unavoidable panic outside. The sheer, terrifying practicality of survival likely forced many sensitive souls to discover a level of resilience they previously believed only peasants possessed. Dr. Anthelmy's clinic remains, for now, a pocket of quiet resistance. But the change is undeniable. He knows that the time for his elaborate, psychological architecture is fleeting. He must now prepare his final, sensory anchor for those who still seek his solace, a quiet, portable piece of calm to carry through the coming storm. Knowing that the era of his gentle, protracted psychological cures is drawing to a close, Dr. Anthelmy prepares a final, deeply personal element for his remaining patients, and for you, the quiet observer. This is the gentle farewell of the chamomile pouch, a physical, sensory anchor to the peace he prescribed, one that can be carried discreetly through the coming upheaval. He reaches not for his pen, but for a small, simple square of finely woven white linen. He takes a generous pinch of the dried chamomile petals from his jar, the same quiet flower whose essence subtly scented the therapeutic letters. He wraps the petals carefully, tying the linen pouch shut with a thin piece of silk ribbon. This small, handheld object is his final, tangible prescription. The historical grounding is the ancient practice of using amulets or sachets for medicinal or protective purposes. In an age of terror and uncertainty, a physical object imbued with gentle intention provided a profound psychological comfort. Dr. Anthelmy was transforming his high-minded philosophy into a portable, folk remedy, ensuring that the quiet certainty of the chamomile could literally accompany the patient when the doctor could not. It was a pocket-sized reminder that calm, though challenged, was still possible. He presents the small pouch with a calm dignity, explaining its purpose not in medical terms, but in philosophical ones. Carry this, he might advise, and whenever the noise of the world or the whispers of doubt become too insistent, take a moment. Hold this simple herb in your hand, feel its texture, inhale its quiet scent, and recall the long, unhurried rhythm of the letters you have read. Know that the spirit of calm resides not only in my words, but in the simplest truths of nature. The unusual detail is the shift from the visual/rhetorical cure, the letter, to the purely olfactory/tactile cure, the pouch. The letter required quiet time, good light, and mental focus, luxuries that were rapidly disappearing in revolutionary Paris. The pouch required only a moment, a hidden hand in a pocket, and a brief inhale. It was a practical adaptation of his gentle philosophy, a recognition that medicine must sometimes be instantaneous and discreet to survive a crisis. It was the original emergency calm button. And here lies the subtle, gentle mystery. Did the patient's nerves relax because of the genuine, slight sedative properties of the volatile oils in the chamomile? Or did they relax purely from the power of suggestion? The profound, quiet reassurance carried by the touch and scent of an object personally prepared by their trusted healer. Just as the scented ink reinforced the words, the pouch now reinforces the memory of the words, proving that a therapeutic relationship could endure even the end of an era. You receive the small, soft linen pouch now. It is warm from the doctor's hand, and the scent of the dried petals is delicate but unmistakable. It is a quiet promise held in the palm of your hand that despite the impending noise and chaos outside, you carry a small, internal sanctuary of quiet history. You tuck the pouch securely away as you prepare to leave the gabled clinic, stepping back toward the loud forces that will redefine the future of medicine. You step back out of the quiet alley and the soothing bubble of Dr. Anthelmy's world, and the noise of the revolution hits you like a sudden, jarring physical force. The air is no longer just thick with candle smoke. It's buzzing with urgent political fervor, the constant rhythm of marching feet, and the loud, unforgiving pronouncements of the new regime. The philosophical calm that sustained the chamomile letter treatment is rapidly being replaced by the uncompromising demands of practicality. The historical grounding here is the radical shift in medical priorities after 1789. The revolution needed strong, functional citizens. The old medical focus on the delicate nerves of the elite, on subjective feeling, and on the therapeutic power of poetry was suddenly deemed irrelevant, even counter-revolutionary. The era of the anatomist and the surgeon had arrived. Medicine became obsessed with what was observable, measurable, and useful, fixing broken bodies, managing mass infections, and understanding disease through dissection and clinical observation rather than through abstract philosophical theory. The entire concept of hypochondry as a refined ailment falls apart. In a time when real, palpable terror is everywhere, when food is scarce, and the threat of the public executioner is constant, the idea that a wealthy citizen is suffering because their spirit is too sensitive simply becomes absurd and politically dangerous. The vague, internal anxieties that Dr. Anthelmy treated with such care are drowned out by the harsh, unambiguous realities of external, life-threatening events. The unusual detail is the fate of the medical records. The gentle, handwritten letters, so prized for their emotional nuance, were not documents that fit well into the new, highly organized, bureaucratic system of revolutionary health administration. The new hospitals and medical schools demanded standardized forms, quantifiable data, and clear, functional diagnoses. The long, rambling sentences filled with poetic reassurance were useless for mass record keeping, and many were likely lost or discarded, seen as sentimental clutter from a bygone age. The elegance of the cure contributed to its historical disappearance. There's a small, stark joke in the fact that the only thing that could truly cure the aristocratic obsession with hypochondry wasn't a philosophical letter, but the very real and present threat of losing one's head. Nothing forces a person to suddenly discover their internal resilience, like the noise of a very large, practical instrument of death being erected in the town square. This leads us to the gentle mystery of resilience. Did the abrupt, violent transition from the age of sensibility to the age of revolution permanently alter the way the French viewed the mind-body connection? Did they swing too far into pure, clinical materialism, discarding the profound, if elusive, power of the therapeutic relationship that Dr. Anthelmy had mastered? The focus on the tangible and the visible meant that the subtle, invisible power of the mind over the body was sidelined for over a century, a quiet loss that the revolutionary noise obscured. The gentle scent of the chamomile pouch in your pocket now feels like a tiny, fragile act of historical defiance against the overwhelming, pragmatic clamor of the new era. The world no longer has time for long, gentle sentences, but the memory of their calming power persists, carried in a small piece of linen. Decades, even centuries, have now passed since Dr. Anthelmy composed his final soothing sentence. The roar of the revolution has faded into the dry text of history books. You find yourself in a quiet, climate-controlled archive, a place where history sleeps on dusty, paper-filled shelves. This is where we might trace the faint, preserved remnants of the doctor's work, the fragile evidence of his unique medical kindness. The historical grounding is the meticulous, often unintentional preservation of documents. While many of Dr. Anthelmy's personalized, unscientific records were likely discarded, some fragments survived, perhaps bundled with a collection of estate papers or filed in error alongside a stack of more serious anatomical notes. These surviving prescriptive letters are now historical treasures, offering a unique window into the lost art of moral medicine. Imagine yourself seated at a large, polished wooden table, carefully turning the pages of a small collection of old correspondence. The papers are brittle, the ink is faded to a pale brown, but the flowing script is unmistakable. And if you lean in very closely, you might still catch the faintest, most subtle aroma, not quite floral, not quite earthy, the ghost of the original chamomile infusion still clinging to the ancient fibers of the paper. This gentle, lingering scent is a sensory link to the emotional intent of the doctor. The unusual touch is the sheer uniformity of the calm. Even in the archived letters written to different patients about various anxieties, the tone remains consistently gentle, expansive, and reassuring. It's clear that the style was the major part of the treatment, a single, sustained rhythm of peace applied to multiple forms of suffering. They are all master classes in subtle validation, suggesting that the true illness Dr. Anthelmy was fighting across all his cases was simply anxiety itself. There is a subtle, comforting joke here in the quiet longevity of the intent. The loud, aggressive treatments of the conventional doctors of 1789, the sharp incisions, the fiery purges, have left no trace but dry accounts of pain. But the soft, philosophical words of Dr. Anthelmy, the sentimental doctor, have endured, their quiet sincerity literally preserved on the page by the very gentle quality of the materials he chose. The most fragile evidence turned out to be the most resilient. This preservation leaves us with a reassuring mystery, the enduring power of gentle intention. Even as you read the faded script in this quiet room, you can feel the calming cadence in the language. The historical debate shifts. Perhaps the purpose of these letters was not solely to cure a specific ailment, but to leave the patient. And now you, the reader, with a lasting sense of having been cared for with profound and elegant respect. That feeling of being genuinely seen and soothed is the true legacy archived here. You close the folder carefully, leaving the fragile history to sleep. The archive is silent, the only sound the soft turning of pages by some distant colleague, a constant, gentle reminder of the historical flow of time. Leaving the silent Parisian archive, you start to wonder if Dr. Anthelmy's gentle approach was truly a singular eccentricity, confined to one modest clinic, or if it was part of a broader, quiet movement. We search now for evidence of a quiet ripple, similar gentle, psychological focus treatments that might have been practiced in other major European cities, hidden beneath the loud narrative of burgeoning laboratory science. The historical grounding here is the widespread cultural phenomenon of sentimentalism that swept across Europe in the late 18th century. The obsession with highly tuned nerves, the intense focus on individual feeling, and the profound influence of Rousseau's philosophy were not limited to France. Every major city, London, Vienna, Berlin, had its share of wealthy, sensitive individuals prone to the vapors and highly susceptible to the anxieties of the age. Logically, this common clientele would have created a common demand for gentle, non-alarming cures. The unusual detail is that the counterparts to Dr. Anthelmy likely existed, but their records are even harder to find. While the Parisian physician's letter writing was unique, the underlying philosophy, treating the imagination as the source of illness and cure, was not. These doctors may have adopted different delivery systems. A London physician might have prescribed long, philosophical walks in a carefully curated garden. A Viennese doctor might have recommended specific pieces of soothing music to be played daily. Or a German doctor might have focused on detailed, gentle diaries to re-regulate the patient's internal narrative. They were all essentially prescribing the same medicine: focused, calm, and moral reassurance. The true medicine wasn't the chamomile or the long walk. It was the therapeutic relationship itself, which transcended national borders. A sensitive soul in Vienna, fearing social ruin from a moral indiscretion, was fundamentally suffering from the same self-generated anxiety as a noble in Paris. Both required a physician who was empathetic, discreet, and willing to validate the sincerity of their distress. It's a gentle historical joke that these quiet practitioners of sentimental medicine were often overlooked by historians because they were so very undramatic. History tends to focus on the loud, the grand, and the spectacular. The first successful surgery, the discovery of a new chemical element, the violent revolution. A doctor who simply calmed someone down with a poem and a flower tea doesn't make for a thrilling textbook chapter. Their effectiveness was often their undoing in the historical record, as quiet cures leave few noticeable scars or sensational archives. This leads us to a comforting mystery. Was the quiet, gentle doctor of the age of sensibility the true unsung hero of early psychological medicine? While the loud anatomists were advancing surgical techniques, these quiet philosophers of the mind were laying the subtle foundation for modern holistic and psychological care. The understanding that the patient's narrative, their environment, and their emotional state are all fundamental parts of the healing process. You imagine these quiet figures in their various gabled houses across Europe, each penning their version of the calming prescription, perhaps each using a different local herb, but all sharing the same deep commitment to the rhythm of rest. It's a comforting thought that even during an era of global upheaval, the philosophy of gentle kindness managed to flow like a quiet, underground river. We jump forward now, leaving the dusty archives and the whispers of the 18th century, to a moment of quiet reflection in the modern era. You realize that Dr. Anthelmy's gentle philosophy didn't vanish entirely. It simply went dormant, waiting for a less dramatic, less pragmatic age to be rediscovered. His method now finds a distinct, recognizable modern echo in the concepts of the placebo effect and the importance of holistic care. The historical grounding here is the contemporary medical acceptance that a patient's belief is a powerful physiological force. Dr. Anthelmy understood this instinctively. He just called it the power of the imagination. When he spent hours writing a beautifully scripted letter, scenting it with chamomile, and detailing the nobility of the patient's sensitive soul, he was meticulously, expertly maximizing the placebo response. He was telling the patient, "I am devoting all my most gentle, elegant resources to your specific, sensitive being. You are worthy of this detailed care." That ritual of deep, personal attention was arguably the most potent ingredient in his prescription. The modern concept of holistic care is the spiritual successor to Dr. Anthelmy's practice. We recognize now that a diagnosis cannot be divorced from the patient's stress level, their social environment, and their emotional narrative. The anxiety and shame surrounding an illness, like the Peril venereal then, or a modern chronic condition now, can be as debilitating as the physical symptoms themselves. A modern physician who practices good bedside manner, who listens patiently, uses gentle language, and validates the patient's suffering, is channeling the essence of the chamomile letter. The unusual detail is how little the core human need has changed. The 18th century noble needed validation that their suffering was noble, and a 21st century patient needs validation that their suffering is real and treatable. The prescription has simply evolved from a 7-page philosophical treatise to a physician who takes a moment to sit down, make eye contact, and explain the diagnosis in a calm, unhurried voice. The method of delivery is different, but the medicine of reassurance remains the same. It's a gentle joke that after centuries of aggressive, scientific pursuit, modern medicine is finally circling back to say, "You know, that sentimental doctor who just gave people tea and a long poem. He was onto something." The expensive scanners and advanced chemistry are essential, but they are incomplete without the quiet, personalized attention that soothes the nervous imagination. This brings us to a beautiful, quiet mystery, the unquantifiable power of kindness. No machine can measure the efficacy of true empathy. Dr. Anthelmy's legacy reminds us that in medicine, the simplest gesture, the elegant script, the calming scent, the long, unhurried explanation, can have a profound, lasting impact that science can acknowledge but cannot fully quantify. You can feel the subtle, calming influence of this realization. The gentle past is present in the care of the modern world. The doctor's quiet certainty is now woven into the fabric of good practice, guiding you toward a restful, quiet acceptance of the enduring connection between mind and body. As we conclude our historical wandering, we revisit the fundamental philosophical argument that Dr. Anthelmy's entire practice personified. This is the unsettled debate, the timeless question that has plagued medical historians, philosophers, and physicians for centuries. Where does the physical reality of the body end and the psychological power of the mind begin? The historical grounding is the tension inherent in Dr. Anthelmy's treatment itself. He was using a real, established botanical remedy, chamomile tea for digestion/calm, alongside an entirely mental, artistic cure, the poetic letter. He was a practitioner of a delicate dualism, treating the patient as both a biological machine that needed chemistry and a sensitive soul that needed literature. He never drew a firm line, understanding that for the patient, the physical symptom and the psychological terror were entirely fused. The debate, which continues even today, centers on causation. When Dr. Anthelmy's patient recovered, was it because the actual disease resolved through time, aided by the mild effects of the herbal tea? Or was it because the therapeutic narrative successfully dismantled the debilitating anxiety, which in turn allowed the body's natural healing mechanisms to take over? The historical records, so focused on observable pathology, cannot provide a clean answer. The unusual detail is the philosophical comfort this ambiguity provided. By refusing to definitively separate the two, Dr. Anthelmy offered his sensitive patient a holistic dignity. He implicitly stated, "Your suffering, whether it begins in the nerve or the spirit, is equally valid and equally worthy of my highest attention." For the 18th century mind, caught between the rational demands of the Enlightenment and the emotional demands of sentimentalism, this ambiguity was profoundly restful. It allowed the patient to be both scientifically observed and spiritually validated at the same time. It's a gentle joke that centuries of scientific research have largely confirmed Dr. Anthelmy's intuition. It's impossible to truly isolate the mind from the body. The power of expectation, the stress response, and the profound impact of social shame all demonstrate that the physical and mental are simply two languages describing the same experience. Our modern brain scans are merely providing quantifiable evidence for the efficacy of the chamomile letter. This philosophical ambiguity is the final, deep mystery of our journey. The debate remains unsettled not because we lack data, but because the human experience itself resists such clean division. The mind is capable of generating profound physical distress, and the body's ailments are always processed through the filter of the mind. You feel a profound sense of quiet closure. The tension of the body versus the mind, the great stress of the intellectual age, has been resolved for now by the simple, gentle logic of kindness and attention. The journey through the history of calm is drawing to its close. We step back now to the threshold of Dr. Anthelmy's gabled clinic, making our final exit. You are stepping back out into the late-night Parisian air, which is now cool, still, and entirely different than when you arrived. The subtle scent of old stone, wet plaster, and the faint, lingering perfume of dried chamomile is carried on the breeze. The sensory contrast is profound. When you arrived, the air was thick with the anxiety of the coming revolution and the high-strung tension of the age of nerves. Now, the residual atmosphere is one of resolution and quiet acceptance. The city is falling asleep, its great historical drama temporarily muted. The distant clatter of a carriage is softer, the shadows less menacing, the sheer noise of existence less insistent. You carry two invisible things with you and one very small physical thing. The first is the quiet assurance of rhythm, the long, gentle cadence of the doctor's sentences, which taught your mind to slow its restless thoughts. The second is the simple, powerful truth of intention, the realization that sometimes the most effective remedy is the one delivered with the most profound, unhurried care. And the third, the physical reminder, is the small linen chamomile pouch tucked away securely, a pocket-sized anchor of peace. The historical grounding for this final moment is the recognition of therapeutic closure. Dr. Anthelmy's goal was not to send the patient out with renewed energy for political agitation, but with a sense of internal quietude, a feeling that the storm has passed and that the nervous system is finally resting. You feel that sense of deep, settling calm now. The anxious questions that began the journey, the fear of the Peril venereal, the shame of the hypochondry, have been so thoroughly enveloped in poetry and gentle philosophy that they have lost their sharp, alarming edge. The final, gentle joke is on the revolutionary noise, no matter how loud the events outside become. The quiet knowledge of inner peace, once truly acquired, is difficult to dislodge. The elegance of a gentle cure can outlast the clamor of a political movement. Your mind is quieter now. The historical journey has acted as its own long, prescriptive letter, gently guiding your focus away from the anxieties of the present moment and into the quiet, resolved details of the past. The lingering scent of chamomile is a final, soft reminder to simply let go. You are ready now to follow the quiet street, leaving the history of panic and the clinic of peace behind you, and drift entirely into the night. You are stepping back out into the late-night Parisian air, which is now cool, still, and entirely different than when you arrived. The subtle scent of old stone, wet plaster, and the faint, lingering perfume of dried chamomile is carried on the breeze. The sensory contrast is profound. When you arrived, the air was thick with the anxiety of the coming revolution and the high-strung tension of the age of nerves. Now, the residual atmosphere is one of resolution and quiet acceptance. The city is falling asleep, its great historical drama temporarily muted. The distant clatter of a carriage is softer, the shadows less menacing, the sheer noise of existence less insistent. You carry two invisible things with you, and one very small physical thing. The first is the quiet assurance of rhythm, the long, gentle cadence of the doctor's sentences, which taught your mind to slow its restless thoughts. The second is the simple, powerful truth of intention, the realization that sometimes the most effective remedy is the one delivered with the most profound, unhurried care. And the third, the physical reminder, is the small linen chamomile pouch tucked away securely, a pocket-sized anchor of peace. The historical grounding for this final moment is the recognition of therapeutic closure. Dr. Anthelmy's goal was not to send the patient out with renewed energy for political agitation, but with a sense of internal quietude, a feeling that the storm has passed and that the nervous system is finally resting. You feel that sense of deep, settling calm now. The anxious questions that began the journey, the fear of the Peril venereal, the shame of the hypochondry, have been so thoroughly enveloped in poetry and gentle philosophy that they have lost their sharp, alarming edge. The final, gentle joke is on the revolutionary noise. No matter how loud the events outside become, the quiet knowledge of inner peace, once truly acquired, is difficult to dislodge. The elegance of a gentle cure can outlast the clamor of a political movement. Your mind is quieter now. The historical journey has acted as its own long, prescriptive letter, gently guiding your focus away from the anxieties of the present moment and into the quiet, resolved details of the past. The lingering scent of chamomile is a final, soft reminder to simply let go. You are ready now to follow the quiet street, leaving the history of panic and the clinic of peace behind you, and drift entirely into the night. Sweet dreams.